President Trump is putting some of the Biden era fuel efficiency standards into reverse. And he was flanked by some major automotive GMs from Ford, GM, and Stellantis today talking about these fuel efficiency to allow automakers to sell gas-powered vehicles a little bit easier. President Trump on social media said they terminated Joe Biden's ridiculously burdensome CAFE standards. Thanks to the president, Americans will save nearly $109 billion over the next 5 years. Let's bring into the conversation right now Reuters reporter David Shepardson. David, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And we talk about these CAFE, corporate average fuel economy, some of these standards. It's very complex. Simplify it for me. What exactly happened today?
So the Trump administration proposed undoing what you said, those Biden-era fuel economy standards. And you're right, they were aimed at prodding the auto companies and consumers into buying more EVs, more efficient vehicles over the next 5 to 10 years. This rule will reduce the upfront cost, the administration estimates, by about $930. But it will have some negative impacts because as people buy more gasoline-powered vehicles, their fuel costs will go up versus what they would have spent on EVs. So when you're talking about the vehicle fleet, 300 million vehicles, $1 trillion of economic activity involving cars, anything you do has both pluses and minuses. But the administration is arguing better to give people choice and not sort of put the government's foot on the scale of EVs, which clearly the Biden administration sought to do. Now, they thought over the long period of time, people will save money on fuel costs. It will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But there's a trade-off, which is you have to pay a higher upfront cost because those battery vehicles are more expensive than the internal combustion equivalent.
And it's interesting because they talked about some of these Biden era kind of fuel efficiencies, saying they wanted it to be about 50.4 miles per gallon by model year 2031. They're reeling that back into some 34. That feels like a large contrast, correct?
It's huge, right? And so a lot of it is sort of your position in the government. Let's back up. So CAFE got created in 1975 during the aftermath of the Arab oil embargo, the oil crisis, a time when, we had 55 miles per gallon and people were wearing sweaters, and it was all about trying to save oil at all costs. Right? And so this regulation has forced the auto companies over time to build more efficient vehicles, even when people don't want to do it, right? So it was kind of about making people eat their vegetables and maybe buy a car that's more efficient that they didn't necessarily want to pay for. But these rules have required companies over time to do that. And so the administration is making the argument, hey, we're pumping more oil than ever. We argue this has a limited impact on the climate over time, given all the other emissions. Let's not force people to pay more upfront. Let's let them buy what they want. And the question is going to be, what do auto companies do, right? Since a lot of these EVs have been built for regulatory purposes because they had to meet these requirements. What happens in a world without the EV tax credit, without these rules? What's the natural demand for EVs? We don't really know that yet.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because they talked about some of these tax benefits of getting an EV. How much is it a setback for electric vehicles and that push that has been so prevalent in so many communities around the country?
Right. Look, the Biden administration had a multi-pronged approach to getting EVs, right? I call it the carrots and the sticks. The carrots were $5 billion in government funds to build public EV charging stations, the $7,500 tax credit, very large tax credits to the auto companies to build battery vehicles. And then the stick side was these very aggressive regulatory rules and allowing California, remember, to set its own rules to ban the internal combustion engine by 2035. Now you've seen the administration sort of undo all of that, right? The one big beautiful bill got rid of the EV tax credit. They stopped collecting fuel economy fines. This undoes this regulation. President signed legislation in June that bars California from its 2035 plan. So it's really been a whole scale reversal of that effort. Now, we did see a little bit of a bump up in EV sales before September 30th. That's because the EV tax credit was expiring. You saw people pulling ahead some of those purchases. But now we're in a world without the EV tax credit and without these regulatory incentives. And so clearly EV sales are going to decline, at least in the short term. But the auto companies would argue in the long term, it's a better technology. You don't have to go to the gas pump. You don't have to, you don't have to get your oil changed. Or it's a simpler vehicle. And people who drive a Tesla or others usually don't go back to gasoline vehicles. So I do think over time we're going to see EVs adoption. It's just going to be at a slower demand curve than the Biden administration was posing.
And we talk about a lot of these tax benefits because not just about manufacturing. On social media, you kind of point this out, saying they will no longer be able to sell those CAFE credits to other automakers, and that is something that happened. They also mentioned that some of the interest payments will be tax deductible. How big of a deal could these be, and how much are they leaning into that fact as well?
Right. That's a really great point, because Tesla, gets hammered here, right? Because over time, a lot of their profits have been through selling these credits. Because one way that GM or Ford or Stellantis has been able to offset some of those V8, gas-powered vehicles is by buying these credits from Tesla for the EVs that they produce. And the administration is proposing no more credit trading, so you have to meet the standards on your own. No more money to Tesla for those credits. So I do think, or Rivian, another company that builds just EVs. So over time, this is going to hurt those companies. And the other question is, what's the calculus for an auto company to build an EV? It's going to be strictly about profit and loss. And we know now these vehicles are very expensive. Battery prices have got to come down to make them more competitive. And you're right. The president talked about this issue about he's in that one big beautiful bill. Your interest payments are tax deductible only on U.S. made vehicles. That's a key driver. So we want to get that tax credit for the deduction on the interest you're paying on your new car loan. You got to make sure it was assembled in the U.S. Otherwise, you don't get it.
Inside the Oval Office, we heard from President Trump, we heard from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, we heard from the CEOs of Ford, GM, and Stellantis, and one of them mentioned that this is just the tip of the iceberg. What could come next? Could they roll them back even further? What else are they looking at to manage this?
Well, so there's still the EPA side, right? So they have parallel emissions rules that they're going to try to unwind. There's also rules on heavy-duty trucks, right? The trucking industry wants the administration to make it more reasonable to comply with these EV mandates, because that is really effectively EV mandate over time for semi-trucks, larger vehicles. So you are going to see a continuing push from the administration toward unwinding, more of these rules across the board. And then the biggest one is the endangerment finding. I know it sounds technical, but it's basically the underpinning of all the climate rules stem from this court case called Mass versus EPA. And the EPA made a finding called the endangerment finding that CO2 poses a danger to human health. And that gives them then the legal obligation to regulate power plants, tailpipe emissions from cars. And the Trump administration wants to repeal that. And if they're successful in repealing that, then that eliminates the legal basis for a lot of those rules that restrict CO2 emissions across the economy. So that's probably what they're talking about in terms of the biggest biggest remaining step. And of course, they still have to finalize these fuel economy rules that were proposed today.
Yeah, it is a very complex issue, so we appreciate you simplifying it. My last question, David, before I let you go, because they say President Biden or President Trump saying that $109 billion in savings for Americans. How real and how quickly could people start seeing these impacts? Because it does take some time to turn over some of the fleet of vehicles if you're buying a new vehicle. How quickly could this really have a true impact?
So there is a chart in the document that says it's over $35 billion in savings for the auto companies, $8.7 billion for GM alone. It's a $930 reduction in technology costs per vehicle for the auto companies to comply. But it's really up to them to decide how much do they want to pass that savings on to the consumer. And the auto business is a long lead time, right? They're designing vehicles for 5 years from now, 7 years from now, right? So that is a question, right? I mean, now I do think if their profits go up over time, if they're able to sort of pull back some of that EV spending, maybe they can, they'll have more leeway to reduce some prices. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of, people are pretty frustrated in general with car prices. In October, the average neutral car transaction price hit an all-time $50,000, it's expensive to buy a new car. And you layer upon that average new car interest rates over 6%. It's tough to buy a new vehicle, for sure today.
Yeah, and obviously those interest rates, if you're kind of deducting it on your tax, that only comes obviously once a year, kind of in that springtime, so you might not feel it right away. David, are we missing anything? Is there anything else you want to note about this?
No, just that it's gonna. I mean, the other big issue looking ahead is USMCA, right? The auto companies want the administration to renew this big trade agreement between Canada and Mexico. That's the big issue next year. What does it mean for U.S. auto production? A lot of the parts come from Mexico and Canada. How does the president's tariff policy factor in? So, there's never a slow day for the auto industry, whether it's emissions or tariffs or safety or self-driving cars, you name it.
Yeah, it was a busy day today, to say the least. Never a slow day. So, David Shepardson, thank you so much. I appreciate your time here on Live Now.
Great to talk to you.
All right, great chat. All right, interesting conversation as those fuel efficiency standards put in reverse from those Biden-era CAFE regulation and rules. I want to put this up here one more time here on Live Now from Fox, from the president, from Senator Cruz, actually inside the Oval Office, talking about this is a victory for consumers. You as a consumer can now buy the car that you want.